My father's 70th birthday cake was shaped like the battery housing I had designed. Gray fondant covered the sides. Thin, copper-colored lines marked the vents. Someone had even copied the narrow pressure channels near the corners, the part that had taken me almost 2 years to get right. The bakery had done a beautiful job. They had also misspelled the product's name on the card beside it. Forgeshealed. Invented by Victor Liu. I noticed the error before I noticed the security officer. Marcus, my older brother, stood beside the cake holding a champagne glass. Behind him, a large screen displayed photographs from the company's history. Dad in the original workshop. Dad shaking hands with our first automotive customer. Dad standing beside the first successful Forgeshield unit. I was in that last photograph. At least, my hands were. The rest of me had been cropped out. To Dad, Marcus said, lifting his glass. The man whose vision turned a 6-person machine shop into one of the most trusted names in battery safety. More than 200 people applauded. Our managers were there. Suppliers, local officials, representatives from our 2 largest customers. Near the front sat Elaine Mercer, chief executive of Northline Capital, and Thomas Bell, the attorney leading Northline's acquisition team. Northline had spent the previous year buying small manufacturers across Ohio and Michigan. Its plan was to combine Liu Thermal Systems with 2 other suppliers and place Forgeshield inside 3 new electric vehicle battery platforms. If the deal closed, Northline would become the 2nd largest independent battery safety supplier in the Midwest. My family would become wealthy. My invention would be used in hundreds of thousands of vehicles. Marcus had spent a month insisting that Northline's visits were exploratory. Elaine Mercer did not usually attend exploratory birthday parties. My father smiled beneath the stage lights. Ryan, my younger brother and the company's chief financial officer, leaned over to straighten Dad's tie before joining Marcus near the microphone. And tonight, Ryan said, we're also marking an important transition. The security officer reached my table. He carried a cardboard box containing my company laptop, safety glasses, coffee mug, and 3 laboratory notebooks. Not all of them, just 3. Marcus turned toward me. After 17 years of technical service, Dana has decided to step away from daily operations. For a second, I assumed this was some badly planned joke. Then applause began. Not everyone joined in. Carla Mendez, our plant manager, sat beside me. She had spent the afternoon solving a press problem on line 2 and had arrived at the party 20 minutes late with a faint streak of machine grease near one cuff. Her hands tightened around her water glass. "What is he doing?" she asked without moving her lips. Priya Shah, the safety director for our largest automotive customer, folded the event program and placed it beside her plate. Elaine Mercer did not clap either. I remained seated. "I haven't decided that." Marcus gave a light laugh for the guest. "We've had several conversations. You spoke. I said no." A waiter paused with a tray of champagne. 2 glasses touched with a small, bright sound. Ryan moved closer to the microphone. "Dana has never enjoyed the leadership side of the business. This change will allow her to focus on independent interests while the company enters its next phase." Ryan spoke the way he wrote financial reports, smoothly, carefully, every sentence polished, until no human decision appeared responsible for anything. My father lowered his eyes toward the cake. He did not appear surprised. That hurt more than Marcus's announcement. The security officer placed the box beside my chair. "I'm sorry, Ms. Liu," he murmured. Carla pushed back her chair. I caught her wrist. "Don't. They can't do this. Not here." Her face hardened. "They picked here." Marcus came down from the stage. "This is Dad's night," he said under his breath. It was an old sentence in our family. Not those exact words every time, but close enough. Don't upset Dad. Don't challenge Marcus in front of a client. Don't ask Ryan about missing numbers during Sunday dinner. Don't force anyone to explain what they mean when they say family. The slideshow changed again. Dad and Marcus were accepting an innovation award for technology neither of them had invented. Priya raised her hand. "Before Dana leaves, I need clarification on the patent renewal." Marcus stopped walking. "Attorneys are handling it. The manufacturing rights expire in 60 days, Priya said. "Our next production order requires proof that you can continue using the technology." Elaine Mercer leaned toward Thomas Bell. Marcus recovered quickly. "The transfer has already been approved." "By whom?" Priya asked. "Dana. My name came out before he could replace it with something safer." Priya turned toward me. Did you sign a transfer? No. Ryan's fingers moved to his cufflink. He turned it once, then again. Thomas Bell opened the folder in front of him. Elaine's attention remained on Marcus. Marcus leaned close enough that only our table could hear him. You're really going to burn down everything Dad built because your feelings got hurt? I opened the cardboard box and removed the oldest laboratory notebook. Its blue cover had faded near the binding, and a scorch mark crossed one corner. Inside were the first tests that eventually became Ford's Shield. Whoever packed my office missed the important records, I said. Marcus's jaw shifted. I stood. Carla stood with me. You don't have to come, I told her. I'm walking to the door, not joining a revolution. She lifted one side of the cardboard box before I could stop her. Together, we crossed the banquet room, while the slideshow continued without us. Dad appeared beside production lines, customers and politicians. Marcus stood in most of the newer photographs. Ryan appeared whenever a ribbon was cut or a check was presented. At the door, Carla handed the box back. Call me when you get home. I'll be fine. That wasn't a question. I almost smiled. Then I noticed Dad watching us from the stage. He made no attempt to follow. I reached the hallway before the cake knife touched the fondant. My brothers believed they were removing a difficult employee. They had forgotten that the company Northline wanted to buy did not own the invention that made the purchase valuable. The patent in my cardboard box had a longer history than the lie Marcus told that evening. Dad founded Lou Thermal Systems in 1988. The original shop stood behind a tire warehouse in Columbus, Ohio. It had 2 used stamping presses, a forklift that stalled every winter, and a roof that leaked near the employee lockers. Dad built metal housings for industrial power units. Nothing glamorous. Steel boxes, brackets, ventilation panels, protective covers. Marcus was 4 years older than me, and comfortable anywhere adults were discussing money. He remembered customers' birthdays. He noticed expensive watches. By high school, he could shake someone's hand without appearing nervous. Ryan was 4 years younger than me, and spent most of childhood making budgets for things no one had asked him to budget. I was the middle child who took appliances apart. When our toaster stopped working, I removed every screw and arranged the pieces across the kitchen floor. Mom came home, stepped over the heating coil, and asked whether I knew how to put it back together. I know why it broke, I told her. That wasn't my question. Dad told that story for years. He also decided early what each of us would become. Marcus would run the company. Ryan would handle the finances. I would make sure whatever they sold actually worked. I planned to prove him wrong by never joining the business. I studied materials engineering, moved to Dayton, and took a job with an aerospace supplier. The work was demanding, anonymous and separate from Sunday dinners. Then Mom developed ovarian cancer. I came home to help and stayed after she died. 3 weeks after her funeral, Dad asked me to review a failed battery enclosure project. A customer needed a lighter housing that could slow a battery fire long enough for people to escape. Dad's team had tried adding thicker steel. During testing, one corner split. Hot gas escaped through the seam and ignited part of the chamber insulation. No one was injured, but the customer suspended the program. The bank began asking questions Dad could not answer. One evening, I found him sitting alone in the prototype room. The overhead lights were off. Mom's old metal thermos rested between his hands. I may have to close line 2, he said. 43 people worked on line 2. Carla supervised the evening shift then. Several operators had known me since I was a child, doing homework in the break room. I told Dad I would help for 6 months. He turned the thermos lid between his palms. Your mother always said you were the one who came home when things got hard. 6 months became 17 years. The early prototypes failed in different ways. Some cracked. Others trapped heat. One produced a smell so awful that Carla banished my next test to a storage shed behind the loading dock. You can poison yourself out there, she said, pointing toward the shed. But the rest of us need our sense of smell. Carla brought me coffee during late tests, argued when I skipped meals, and refused to let the engineering team blame production workers for design problems. The first successful test happened after 2 in the morning. Carla was the only other person at the plant. She wore sweatpants beneath her winter coat and held vending machine coffee while the temperature readings moved across the monitor. The inner layer darkened but held. The vents opened in sequence. The outer surface stayed below the customer's limit. When the test ended, Carla placed her coffee on the floor. Run it again. The second test gave us nearly identical results. Carla watched the final numbers settle. This might keep line 2 open. It did more than that. The system became Forge Shield. I filed the original patent application with Joel Green, an intellectual property attorney I knew from my aerospace work. The company was short on cash, so I paid the first legal fees from my savings. Joel drew up a straightforward arrangement. The patents remained mine. Liu Thermal Systems received the exclusive right to manufacture Forge Shield for 10 years. If the family wanted permanent ownership, they could give me voting shares and a seat on the board. Marcus and Ryan rejected that option. I signed the 10-year deal anyway. The factory needed the contract. I believed the rest could be fixed after the company stabilized. When the first profitable year came, Marcus said the bank wanted continuity. The next year, Ryan said restructuring would complicate taxes. Then Dad had chest pains. Then we opened a second facility. Then another major contract came up for renewal. There was always a reason to wait. My title became Director of Materials Development. I trained engineers, approved safety testing, and handled every serious product failure. Marcus became Chief Executive. Ryan became Chief Financial Officer. Dad remained Chairman. I still owned no voting shares. Whenever a trade magazine credited Dad with inventing Forge Shield, he would pat my shoulder and say, "We know where it came from." By we, he meant the 4 of us. Never the customers. Never the board. Never the people writing the checks. For years, I accepted private acknowledgement in place of public truth. Carla did not. Once, after Marcus accepted an industry award for Forge Shield, she taped a photocopy of my patent application to the break room refrigerator. Marcus had it removed before lunch. Carla printed another copy. When I asked why she was provoking him, she shrugged. Paper has a way of wandering back to where it belongs. I laughed then. I did not understand how much I would need her later. The first clear warning arrived 4 months before Dad's birthday. Ryan left a blue folder on my desk. A yellow tab read, "Signature required." The final pages stated that any technology developed using company resources had always belonged to Liu Thermal Systems. I carried the folder upstairs. Ryan was eating noodles from a paper carton while studying a financial forecast. Why does standardizing old records require me to surrender a patent? You're assigning intent to a housekeeping document. I'm reading it. Ryan pulled the folder closer. That language is broad. It's false. It reflects the economic reality. It says the company owns something it doesn't own. He leaned back. After 17 years, Dana, the distinction is mostly academic. It won't be academic if someone is buying the company. The air conditioning clicked on above us. No sale has been approved. Then there should be no problem sending this to Joel. The napkin in Ryan's hand stopped moving. Why does your personal attorney need to see company paperwork? Because my name is on the patent. His mouth formed a straight line. Exactly. 2 days later, Marcus toured the factory with Elaine Mercer and Northline's acquisition team. Elaine asked questions that showed she already understood our production limits. Northline planned to place Forge Shield inside 3 battery platforms scheduled to launch over the next 4 years. If the acquisition closed, our plant would become the technical center of an operation employing nearly 900 people. Elaine wanted to know whether we could double output without changing the heat-resistant layer. No, I said. Not without a new qualification cycle. Marcus stepped between us. We have a plan to reach target volume within 12 months. Elaine looked back at me. Has engineering approved that plan? No. Marcus laughed. Dana prefers to promise less and deliver more. That approach works well in safety engineering, Elaine said. After the tour, Carla caught up with me near line 2. That woman knows Marcus is selling. So do I. Does she know he's selling your patent? I'm trying to find out. Carla glanced toward the executive group disappearing upstairs. You want me to accidentally lock him in the freight elevator? No. The offer stands. That evening, I stopped Marcus near the main elevators. Does Northline know I own Forge Shield? The lawyers are comfortable. Which lawyers? Not now. The agreement ends soon. We're aware of the calendar. The elevator doors opened. Marcus stepped inside. Try not to turn every conversation into a fire drill. Dad was no more helpful. When I called him, he was watching golf with the television turned too high. Marcus is negotiating a sale. He's finding out what the company is worth. With technology the company doesn't own. Dad lowered the volume. Your brothers aren't thieves. I didn't call them thieves. You're talking like a lawyer. I'm talking like the person whose signature they want. Your mother hated it when you kids fought over technicalities. Mom never asked me to sign away an invention. A golf commentator filled the silence. Then Dad asked whether I had approved the photographs for his birthday slideshow. The draft arrived the next day. Beneath a photograph of me in the original laboratory, the caption read, "Dana Liu providing technical support." Even then, I did not assume my family had built a plan to remove me. Marcus had held my hand in the hospital after Mom died. Ryan once drove through freezing rain to bring me a spare laboratory key. Dad kept my college graduation photograph behind his desk. Those memories did not disappear because a document was wrong. They made the wrong document easier to excuse. Marcus invited me to dinner near the Scioto River. He arrived 10 minutes late, greeted the host by name, and asked whether the restaurant owner had received an invitation to his charity fundraiser. Marcus never entered a room without establishing who knew him. "You've been making Northline nervous," he said. They asked a technical question. You told them their expansion plan was unrealistic. It was. He opened the menu but did not read it. "This is why the board worries about giving you more authority." "What board? You, Ryan, and Dad? You treat every limitation like a crisis. And you treat every safety limit like a public relations problem." Marcus closed the menu. "You know what I think? You don't want recognition. You want the company to admit it can't survive without you. I want Northline told the truth. The truth is that hundreds of people built this company. And one person owns Forge Shield." A server arrived with bread. I asked whether Elaine knew that. Marcus spread butter slowly across one piece. "The attorneys are comfortable." Again, no names. Again, no answer. A few days later, Carla found me in the laboratory, after most of the building had emptied. I was recalculating heat tolerances because sales had promised a production increase without consulting me. She dropped a wrapped sandwich onto my desk. "Eat. I'm not hungry." "You're never hungry when you're angry." I unwrapped the sandwich. Carla leaned against the workbench. "Marcus told department heads you may be leaving." "I'm not. He says you've become resistant to the company's direction." The word changed as it traveled. Resistant became difficult. Difficult became exhausted. Exhausted became unstable under pressure. Each version borrowed something true. I rejected production shortcuts. I insisted on written test results. I had raised my voice in management meetings. Once after sales promised a delivery date without consulting engineering, and once after Ryan delayed replacing a failed ventilation sensor. My brothers did not invent a different woman. They removed every reason behind my behavior and circulated what remained. "Do people believe him?" I asked. Carla pulled a loose thread from her sleeve. "Some do, some don't. Most are waiting to see who signs their paycheck next month." It was not comforting, it was honest. Dad visited the laboratory that Friday. He stood beside the first Forge Shield prototype and ran one hand along the scorched corner. "Your brother sees a chance to finish what I started," he said. "He sees a sale. There's nothing wrong with being paid for a lifetime of work." "Whose lifetime?" His hand stopped. I asked whether he knew Marcus planned to remove me. "No one is removing anyone." "That isn't an answer." Dad lowered himself onto a metal stool. "When I was your age, I slept in this building 3 nights a week. Your mother brought the boys here because we couldn't afford a sitter." "You brought all 3 of us." He glanced at me. "Yes, all 3. Then he rose and adjusted his jacket. "I want the birthday evening to be pleasant. No public argument. Let Marcus handle the guests." At the door, he looked back. "You've always been the practical one, Dana." The birthday party showed me what practical meant to them. Carla followed me into the hotel parking lot after Marcus announced my retirement. "You shouldn't drive yet," she said. "I'm not drunk." "I didn't say you were." She took the box from my hands and placed it in the passenger seat. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Music from the ballroom reached us every time the hotel doors opened. Someone inside had begun playing one of Dad's favorite songs. Carla shoved her hands into her coat pockets. "Tell me what you need. I need you to go back inside." Her face tightened. "Why?" "Because you manage the plant. Because Marcus will be looking for people who chose sides. Because line 2 needs you there tomorrow." "And you?" "I'll call." She studied me long enough to make clear that she did not believe me. Then she touched the roof of my car twice. "Call even if you have nothing useful to say." I drove home with the radio off. The cardboard box sat beside me like a passenger. At home, I carried it into the kitchen and placed it on the table. I took out my safety glasses first. One lens was scratched. The left arm had been repaired with a strip of black tape after a technician stepped on them during an overnight test. Then came my mug. The handle had broken during packing. Someone had placed both pieces inside without wrapping them. I removed the 3 laboratory notebooks, my laptop, and an event name card I had not noticed earlier. Dana Liu. Technical support. The card must have been taken from the display table after I left. I set it beside my mother's old photograph. For several minutes, I remained standing in my coat. Then my knees stopped feeling reliable. I sat on the kitchen floor. I did not cry when Marcus made the announcement. I did not cry when Dad refused to look at me. I did not cry in front of Carla. But on the floor of my own kitchen, holding the broken handle of a company mug, I began to shake. 17 years of missed holidays, overnight tests, and quiet promises had been reduced to a box someone else had packed. I pressed my sleeve against my mouth, because the sound coming out of me did not feel like mine. There was no audience, no buyer, no board, no one I needed to protect from discomfort. I cried until my face hurt. At some point, my phone rang. Carla! I let it ring. She called again 10 minutes later. Then she sent a message. You don't have to be fine tonight. Just text me one word so I know you're home. I stared at the screen. Finally, I typed, home. Her response came immediately. Good. Tomorrow can be ugly too. I slept on the couch without taking off my clothes. The next morning, every employee received an email saying I had voluntarily retired. My badge no longer opened the building. My company account had been disabled. Most of my laboratory records remained inside. The grief from the night before had not disappeared. It had simply become quieter. I called Ryan. You need to correct the announcement. Marcus sent it. You approved it. A calculator clicked in the background. This is temporary, Dana. Restore my access. I can't do that. You're the CFO. That isn't what I meant. I asked whether Northline had required my removal. The calculator stopped. No one removed you. A security officer carried out my computer. You created an untenable situation. Ryan loved language that made people disappear from their own decisions. No one fired me. The situation became untenable. No one lied. The paperwork reflected economic reality. No one betrayed a sister. The transaction required certainty. He announced my retirement in front of investors. You challenged him at Dad's birthday. He chose Dad's birthday because you would have made a private transition impossible. I stopped breathing for half a second. Transition. Ryan's calculator began clicking again. Dad was humiliated. Our father's discomfort had always been the fastest way to end an argument. This time, I let the silence remain until Ryan disconnected. By noon, a courier delivered a letter from the company's attorney. It ordered me not to contact staff or access company systems. It also claimed Ford Shield belonged to Liu Thermal because the company had funded its development. Joel read it in his office. They're muddying the floor, he said. Can they take the patents? They can force you to defend what should already be clear. What about the files inside the plant? We send a preservation notice. If anything disappears after that, they explain why. Joel never promised justice. He promised a process, which was less comforting, but usually more useful. Over the next week, trade publications repeated Marcus's version. One article called him the second-generation leader guiding the family invention into a new era. Another described me as a former technical advisor. Then Northline issued its own announcement. The acquisition, if completed, would integrate Ford Shield into 3 EV programs worth more than $800 million in projected contracts. The press release quoted Elaine Mercer. This technology is central to Northline's strategy for becoming the Midwest's leading independent battery safety supplier. Central, not useful, not optional. Central. That word explained why Marcus needed my signature before Northline completed its review. Carla called from her truck. They're telling people the sale will create 60 new jobs. Did Marcus say when it closes? 30 days. She paused. What happens if you stop them from making Ford Shield? That was the position Marcus had built for me. If I refused to cooperate, he would not be the executive who offered property he did not own. I would be the bitter sister who endangered the factory and Northline's expansion. The story spread quickly. A retired employee named Ben stopped me near the produce section of a grocery store. I heard you're holding the patent over the company. I'm protecting something I created. He picked up a bag of apples, then returned it. People still have mortgages. I know. My son works second shift. I know that too. Ben noticed another shopper approaching. I shouldn't get involved. He walked away without taking any apples. I left my cart beside the oranges. 3 mornings later, I parked across from the factory before dawn. The first shift arrived carrying lunch bags and travel mugs. A man from assembly scraped ice from another employee's windshield before clocking in. The plant lights came on one section at a time. For 17 years, that site had meant responsibility. Now it felt like leverage. I called Joel. I'm considering letting production continue. Under the current management, the factory and the management are not the same thing. Good. You're learning. He told me to write down what I wanted, without using the names Marcus, Ryan, or Dad. I wrote 4 lines on an old receipt. Keep production moving. Keep control of the invention. Correct the ownership story. Do not reward the decisions that created this. Then I contacted Priya. Her first response was formal. I cannot discuss Northline's transaction or provide internal customer records. Please direct further communication through counsel. For several hours, I assumed she was backing away. Then a second message arrived from her personal phone. Airport coffee shop. Tomorrow, 7:15. Priya arrived carrying no briefcase. I'm not here to support you, she said. I gathered that from your email. The email protects my position. This meeting protects my company. She gave me a document Marcus had submitted directly to her employer. It claimed I had permanently transferred Ford Shield to Lou Thermal 5 years earlier. My signature appeared at the bottom. Part of it was real. I recognized it from an old laboratory lease, but I had never signed the transfer. Priya tapped the date. Can you prove that? Not from a printout. Then find the computer file. She pushed the page toward me. Northline needs Ford Shield for 3 launches. If this document fails, the valuation fails with it. Joel requested the original computer file and notified Northline that ownership was disputed. Ryan sent a private message. We can still resolve this as a family. Please stop escalating. The company's cash exposure is significant. Joel read it. He writes like a spreadsheet learned to feel guilt. I replied. Send the original signed transfer. Ryan did not answer. The patent office record still named me as the inventor and current owner. Joel also had the original agreement showing that Lou Thermal could manufacture Ford Shield, but did not own it. A day later, the electronic transfer file arrived. It had been created 7 weeks before Dad's birthday, not 5 years earlier. My signature had been copied from the laboratory lease and pasted into it. The file came from a finance account controlled by Ryan, though several employees could access it. Priya then located the certification submitted with the file. Marcus had personally signed a statement saying he had reviewed the ownership records and confirmed that Lou Thermal held full rights. My 2 brothers were tied to the same false document. Northline postponed the acquisition review. Elaine Mercer called Joel herself. If Ford Shield disappears from the transaction, she said, more than half the projected value disappears with it. Northline had already assigned engineering teams to redesign 3 battery platforms around the technology. A delay could push back vehicle launches and force contracts to be rewritten. Marcus had not only exaggerated his company's value, he had attached Northline's expansion schedule to an ownership claim he could not support. The progress should have made me feel stronger. Instead, I drove to the abandoned storage shed behind the old loading area. Inside, a dark circle still marked the concrete, where one of my failed mixtures had overheated. Someone had written Dana's Stink House across the wall in faded marker. I sat on an overturned crate. A few minutes later, the door scraped open. Carla stepped inside carrying 2 coffees. I saw your car. I thought managers were told not to speak with me. I've ignored more impressive orders. She handed me a cup and sat on another crate. Machine noise crossed the lot in a low, steady hum. People are scared, she said. I know. Second shift is checking job listings. I don't want the doors to close. Carla kicked lightly at a strip of broken insulation. Then keep them open. Just don't hand the keys back to Marcus. We sat there until both coffees cooled. Before leaving, Carla mentioned that the company's board record index listed a minute book covering the year before Northline's offer. Volumes 10 and 12 had been produced. Volume 11 had not. Carla did not possess a secret copy. She had no perfect written confession. She only remembered carrying production reports into formal meetings during the missing period. Ryan's claim that no meetings had occurred did not fit what she had seen. That was enough to ask where the book had gone. Northline scheduled a video conference with Dad, Marcus, and Ryan. Elaine Mercer attended personally. Thomas Bell, Northline's attorney, sat beside her. Joel and I joined from his office. Thomas began without small talk. Does Liu Thermal Systems own the Ford Shield patents? Yes, Marcus said. Joel displayed the patent office record. It identifies Dana Liu as the owner. The company holds a transfer. The transfer you produced was created 7 weeks ago. It recorded an earlier agreement. Where is that agreement? Ryan leaned toward the camera. We are searching archived materials. Thomas asked whether Ryan had ever seen an original bearing my handwritten signature. My understanding was that one existed. That wasn't the question. Ryan cleared his throat. No. Elaine turned toward Dad. Mr. Liu, Northline plans to place this technology inside 3 major vehicle programs. Did your daughter permanently transfer ownership? Dad removed his glasses. We always understood the technology belonged with the company. Elaine did not raise her voice. Understanding is not ownership. She repeated the question. Dad stopped cleaning his lenses. No. Marcus began talking about family expectations. Thomas held up one hand. Did you know Dana retained legal ownership? Dad's glasses remained between his fingers. Yes. Elaine closed the acquisition binder. The sound carried through the speakers. Then, Northline's valuation was based on information the chairman knew was inaccurate. The call ended shortly afterward. Dad asked me to come to the plant that evening. Marcus stood near the windows when I arrived. Ryan had arranged 3 folders in front of him. Dad occupied the chair at the end of the table. Ryan pushed a settlement toward me. The first figure is cash at closing. The second reflects a 3-year advisory agreement. There is an additional amount tied to successful integration. He spoke faster when nervous. Numbers were safer than words such as forgery, sister, or betrayal. The company would publicly identify me as a co-developer. In return, I had to transfer the patents immediately. The payment was smaller than Marcus's projected sale bonus. I returned the document. No. Marcus's palm struck the table. You're going to torch the company because nobody put your face in enough photographs? You fired me using a false story. We removed a problem before it scared off Northline. Ryan's pen stopped above his notes. Dad spoke without raising his head. We were trying to keep the family together. You planned my removal. We planned a transition. You let him announce my retirement at your birthday. Dad pulled the settlement folder closer. You would have argued in private. So you humiliated me in public. Marcus pushed his chair back. You're not the only person who sacrificed. Dad spent 40 years building this. Ryan kept it alive through 3 credit crises. I have customers calling me at midnight. But you walk in with a patent and act like everyone else was carrying your toolbox. You spent 17 years telling people the toolbox was yours. Ryan reopened the folder. If you refuse, Northline leaves. Their integration payments disappear. There is a measurable risk to cash flow within 2 quarters. Say layoffs. He pressed his lips together. There could be staffing adjustments. Say layoffs, Ryan. There could be layoffs. Dad's hand settled on the folder. You know what happens if the sale fails. You knew the manufacturing rights were ending. We believed you would continue them. Why? Dad spoke more softly than either of my brothers. Because you always do the right thing. For 17 years, he had offered that sentence as praise. Now there was a sale price attached to it. I left the settlement on the table. For 1 minute, signing seemed easier. Not right, easier. Then I saw Carla through the glass wall, walking toward line 2 with a roll of production charts beneath her arm. Keeping the factory alive did not require preserving the family arrangement that had damaged it. Joel and I began building another option. Northline rescheduled its final acquisition review for the following Monday. The meeting took place in the plant's training room. Elaine Mercer sat at the center of Northline's table. Thomas Bell sat beside her with the purchase agreement closed in front of him. Marcus entered smiling and joked about Ohio weather. No one responded. Ryan sat beside Dad with a legal pad open. He drew the same square around a blank section of paper until the ink bled through. Marcus's attorney argued that Ford Shield had been created using company resources and that my ownership was a paperwork problem that could be corrected with money. Joel placed 3 things on the screen. The patent office record naming me, the original agreement giving Liu Thermal only temporary manufacturing rights, the recently created transfer containing a copied signature. Thomas leaned forward. You submitted this final document as a historical transfer? Marcus adjusted the contracts in front of him. It reflected our long-standing understanding. Did Dana approve it? No. Was Northline told it had been reconstructed? Marcus's attorney advised him not to answer. Elaine opened the purchase agreement. Our proposed price assumes Lou Thermal controls Forge Shield for the life of 3 platform contracts. Without that control, this is not the business described to us. Priya confirmed that her company had also received the transfer as an authentic ownership record. Marcus turned toward her. We have supplied your company for 8 years without a serious product failure. Because Dana rejected shortcuts, Priya replied. You later used that behavior to justify removing her. Ryan stopped drawing. Joel then asked about Volume 11. The company's index showed it existed. Ryan said he did not know where it was. Dad reached for his water. His thumb moved around the rim without lifting the glass. Joel noticed. Mr. Lou, do you know where the missing volume is? It may be in my home office. Marcus turned sharply. Dad, I took it home. Thomas stopped writing. Why? Some discussions were personal. Did they concern this acquisition? Yes. The patents? Yes. Elaine's expression did not change. Have it brought here. The meeting paused while Dad's driver retrieved the book. Marcus stood near the coffee station, speaking rapidly with his attorney. Ryan remained seated. His pen tore through the corner of the legal pad. I walked to the window overlooking the factory floor. Carla joined me. If Northline leaves, what happens? She asked. The acquisition ends. That isn't what I asked. I'm offering 90 days of continued manufacturing. Her shoulders lowered. Under Marcus? No. Carla had spent the previous week speaking with an employee ownership advisor. She had no guaranteed financing and no miraculous rescue. She had a possible path. If Northline withdrew, an employee trust could attempt to purchase the factory's operating assets using loans, outside investment, and deferred payments to the existing owners. When the meeting resumed, Joel placed my temporary offer on the table. I will authorize continued production for 90 days, I said. Ryan lifted his head. Under what conditions? Independent safety oversight. A financial review. Marcus and Ryan leave operational control. During the transition, the workforce may pursue an ownership trust. Marcus laughed once. You want the factory? I don't. You're deciding who runs it. I'm deciding who may use my invention. Carla opened her binder. We have advisors prepared to evaluate an employee purchase. Ryan flipped through the pages. With what funding? Loans, outside investors, and deferred payments. Carla said. The same way ordinary people buy companies when they aren't given one at birth. Marcus stared at her. Carla shrugged. You asked. Elaine read the temporary offer. If the trust qualifies, she said, Northline may consider a minority investment instead of a full acquisition. Marcus turned toward her. You would finance them after walking away from us? We are walking away from information we cannot rely on, Elaine replied. The factory may still have value under credible management. That did not save the employee plan. It gave it a chance. Then Volume 11 entered the room. The book contained 6 meetings. 3 concerned Northline. 1 focused entirely on Forge Shield ownership. The earliest relevant entry was dated 14 months before Dad's birthday. Ryan had raised the approaching end of the manufacturing agreement. Marcus recommended securing permanent ownership before presenting the company to buyers. Dad said asking me directly would reopen the equity dispute. Then came one sentence written in ordinary black ink. Dana's loyalty to the workforce gives the company practical control regardless of legal title. My father believed he controlled the patents because he controlled what I cared about. Another entry authorized Marcus to describe Forge Shield as company-developed technology during early buyer discussions. The final meeting occurred 6 weeks before the birthday party. Ryan reported that I had refused to sign the housekeeping document. Marcus proposed removing me before Northline's final review. Dad asked whether the transition could be described as voluntary. Marcus said the story would be easier to establish if the announcement happened publicly, with customers and investors present. Dad suggested his birthday because the evening would provide positive context. The cake, the cropped photograph, the packed box, the security officer. Every detail had been selected in advance. Marcus closed his folder. You said those were informal conversations. Dad's voice came out thin. They were discussions. They are signed minutes. I was trying to preserve what we built. Ryan turned toward him. You told us she would sign. I believed she would. You said she always came around. Dad kept his attention on the page. I believed she would think about the consequences. Marcus pushed his chair back. You made it sound guaranteed. I did not tell either of you to fabricate a signature. Ryan's face flushed. You told us legal title didn't matter. I said family loyalty mattered. To Northline? Marcus asked. Did family loyalty matter to Northline? Elaine closed volume 11. No, she said. Accurate ownership mattered to Northline. The three men who had presented a united front at the birthday party began defending themselves separately. Ryan said Marcus had ordered the ownership file. Marcus said Ryan had promised it could be supported. Ryan said Dad had approved presenting the company as the owner. Dad insisted he had never authorized fraud. No one confessed to every step. They reduced their responsibility one sentence at a time until the pieces formed the full picture. Thomas Bell announced that Northline was terminating the original acquisition agreement and reserving the right to recover part of its review costs. Elaine added that Northline would examine the employee trust proposal only after an independent audit and new management were in place. Priya said her company would continue reduced orders under temporary safety oversight. Ryan pressed 2 fingers against his forehead. Marcus pointed toward my offer. You planned to take over. I planned for what would happen when Northline saw the records. You're using the patent to throw your own family out. You used my family to throw me out. Dad picked up the employee proposal. What happens to the Liu name? Carla answered from the other end of the table. The building keeps standing. Marcus turned toward her. For years, everyone at the plant had waited for a Liu to make the final decision. That afternoon, someone from the factory floor told him the company was larger than our surname. The meeting ended without a sale. Northline left with the purchase agreement unsigned. Priya's team stayed to discuss production continuity. Joel began revising the temporary manufacturing deal. Dad remained seated after everyone else stood. Volume 11 lay open in front of him. His finger rested beneath the sentence about my loyalty. I gathered my papers. As I passed his chair, he said my name. Not loudly. The way he used to say it when I was 10 and had fallen asleep in the break room. Dana. I stopped. He closed the book. I never thought it would go this far. That was the problem. He waited for more. I left him with the sentence. The next 90 days were harder than the confrontation. Northline sought repayment of part of its review costs. The bank tightened control over borrowing. 2 customers delayed expansion orders until they knew who would manage production. Marcus resigned as chief executive after those customers refused to negotiate with him. Ryan was suspended while an outside firm reviewed the false transfer and the failed transaction. The review concluded that Ryan had assembled the document using my old signature after Marcus told him to eliminate uncertainty over the patents. Marcus claimed he expected a summary, not a false transfer. Ryan claimed Marcus had reviewed the finished version. Their lawyers argued over those words for months. The factory kept operating. Order volume fell, but it did not disappear. Priya's company maintained enough work to support the transition as long as major safety decisions passed through an independent technical team. Northline did not buy the whole company. After the audit, it made a smaller investment in the employee trust and secured a long-term supply option for 2 of its 3 EV programs. Elaine did not pretend that was generosity. Northline still wanted Ford Shield. The difference was that the new agreement acknowledged who owned it and who would be responsible for making it safely. Carla became part of the interim management group. The first time she attended a lender meeting, she wore the same work boots she used on the factory floor. Marcus's former assistant later told me one banker stared at them throughout the presentation. Carla noticed. At the end of the meeting, she placed one boot beneath the conference table and asked whether he wanted the production forecast or a closer look at the sole. The trust borrowed money. Existing owners accepted deferred payments. Management salaries were reduced. A planned expansion was delayed. Some people left rather than wait. Others stayed because the new structure gave them a reason to believe their work might build something they would eventually own. Dad retained a small, non-voting financial interest. Marcus received far less than the original Northline deal would have paid him. Ryan's portion was reduced by investigation costs and claims connected to the false document. Neither brother kept an executive position. I signed a 5-year manufacturing agreement with the new company. The royalty was higher than the family business had paid, but low enough to keep Ford Shield competitive. Part of the money funded independent testing and technical training. I did not become chief executive. I did not join the board. Marcus had spent months telling people I wanted his chair. It was easier for him to believe that than to accept that I wanted my work treated honestly. I opened a small materials research laboratory on the other side of Columbus. The building had previously housed a printing company. The floors sloped near the loading area, and the break room sink knocked whenever someone used hot water. It was not impressive. It was mine. 6 people joined during the first year. 3 were women who had previously been told they were better suited to technical support than leadership. On our first Friday, one of them brought a grocery store cake to celebrate passing a difficult materials test. The icing leaned to one side. My name was spelled correctly. Dad called almost every evening after resigning as chairman. His first messages concerned the bank, customer orders, and the restructuring. Later, the messages changed. I made mistakes. Your mother would hate what happened. We shouldn't leave things this way. One night, he left a message that lasted nearly 3 minutes. He spoke about Mom's thermos, the old shop. The winter the roof leaked so badly, they placed mixing bowls between the machines. Then he said, "I thought keeping the company together meant keeping the family together." He paused. I may have had that backward. I saved the message. I did not answer. I had spent most of my adult life responding before anyone else had to sit with the result of what they had done. Dad could wait. So could I. The old company sign came down on a Thursday morning. Carla sent me a photograph. 2 maintenance workers stood on ladders beneath the faded blue letters. Lou Thermal Systems. The new sign rested against the brick wall below them. Forge Employee Technologies. Seeing the family name removed felt painful. It also felt honest. A few weeks later, Dad came to my laboratory without calling. He stood in reception holding a cardboard box. Inside was the first Forge Shield prototype. The scorched corner had been wrapped in one of Mom's old kitchen towels. "I thought it should be here," he said. I carried the box to a work table. Dad remained near the entrance. He had lost weight. His jacket hung loosely around his shoulders. "Marcus says you won't speak to him." That's true. And Ryan? Only when the restructuring requires it. His attention settled on the prototype. What about me? For years, I believed Dad's failure was that he did not recognize what I contributed. Volume 11 showed the opposite. He had known exactly what my work was worth. He had simply believed my loyalty would keep me from asking for power, credit, or protection. "I don't know," I said. His jaw moved slightly. He waited for me to soften the answer. I didn't. Dad nodded once. "I suppose that's fair." It was the first time he had used that word without asking me to provide the fairness. He left after a few minutes. The prototype now sits on a shelf in our main test room. I never repaired the scorched corner. The damage explains why the invention exists. On the first anniversary of Forge Employee Technologies, Carla invited me back to the plant. I declined to give a speech but attended the afternoon shift change. The factory still had problems. A press was awaiting repair. One customer had delayed an order. A meeting about overtime had run half an hour too long. It felt real. Near line 2, Ben approached me with his son. The son shook my hand. "My dad said you kept this line alive." Ben examined a mark on the floor. "I may have mentioned something. You told me not to use your name." He looked up. "That was before the trust," Carla called from the hallway. "Dana, come see this before somebody hangs it crooked." She walked me past the room where Northline had ended the original acquisition. The long conference tables were gone. The space had been divided into 2 training classrooms. A group of new hires sat inside one of them, wearing clean safety glasses and temporary badges. An instructor stood beside a diagram of the Forge Shield enclosure, explaining why every heat reading had to be recorded, even when production was behind schedule. On the wall above him hung a framed copy of the first Forge Shield patent. Beneath the patent number was my name. Dana Liu, inventor, not advisor, not support, not the founder's daughter. Inventor. One of the new engineers raised her hand. "What happens if production wants us to skip a test because an order is late?" The instructor pointed toward the framed patent. "We document the concern. We stop the line if safety requires it. Nobody gets cropped out for being inconvenient here." A few trainees smiled. Carla folded her arms. "Now that," she said, "was my idea." My phone vibrated inside my coat. Dad's name appeared on the screen. Around me, the class continued. The instructor turned back to the diagram. The new engineer opened her notebook and wrote down the procedure. The phone stopped vibrating. I left it in my pocket. When I walked out of the training room, my name remained on the wall, and beneath it, a new generation was being taught why it mattered.